You ever notice how the people who talk the loudest are usually the ones with the least to say? Nah, seriously, think about it for a sec. There's this whole vibe in the world right now where everyone's performing, right? Like, we're all out here flexing, posting, proving something to somebody. And the louder you are, the more space you take up, the more real you seem. That's the game. That's what gets the clicks, the views, the whatever. But here's the thing nobody really wants to admit out loud. The quiet ones? They're the ones you should actually be paying attention to. Not in some cringe, motivational poster kind of way. I'm talking about something way more uncomfortable than that. Because there's a difference between being quiet, because you're shy or scared, and being quiet, because you see something nobody else does. You feel me? It's like when you walk into a room and you just know something's off, but you can't put your finger on it. The lights are on, people are talking, everything looks normal. But there's this pressure. Like the air got thicker when you weren't looking. That's the energy I'm talking about. So imagine this, and I want you to really picture it. There's a space. Could be a classroom, could be an office, could be anywhere people gather and pretend everything's cool. And in that space there's always someone running the show. You know the type. The one who gets to decide who matters and who doesn't. Who speaks and who stays silent. They don't even have to say much. Their presence does the work. They've got that kind of power that doesn't need a title or a name tag. It just is. And then there's this kid. Not literally a kid maybe, but you know what I mean. Someone small in the ecosystem. Someone who blends into the walls, who doesn't make waves, who's learned that survival means staying low. They're not weak, don't get it twisted, they're just smart enough to know how the game works. They've watched. They've adapted. They know where the lines are and they don't cross them. At least not where anyone can see. But here's where it gets weird. Something happens. Something so small, so easy to miss that most people wouldn't even clock it. Maybe it's a look. Maybe it's a gesture. Maybe it's the way someone moves when they think no one's watching. And this invisible person? They catch it. They see the crack in the surface. The thing that doesn't add up. The lie everyone's pretending is the truth. And now they know something. You ever been in that position? Where you suddenly realize you're holding information that changes everything, but saying it out loud would cost you more than staying quiet. Yeah. That's the space we're stepping into right now. That tension between what's right and what's safe. Between being seen and staying alive in the system. Because power? Real power doesn't just control what you do. It controls what you think is possible. It makes you believe that the way things are is the way things have to be. And the second someone stops believing that, even if they don't say a word, that's when the whole thing starts to shake. So stay with me here. 'Cause what you're about to see isn't some hero's journey or underdog comeback story. Nah, this is way more human than that. Way more fragile. It's about the moment when someone who's been invisible their whole life realizes they have a choice. And that both options kinda suck. You ready for that? Look, real quick, before we go any deeper into this, if you're already feeling something shift inside you right now, if this is hitting different than the usual stuff you scroll past, just tap that like button. For real. It helps more than you think. Not in some algorithm way, I mean yeah, that too, but because it tells me you're actually here for this. That you want stories that don't wrap up clean. That you're tired of the surface level stuff and you're ready to sit with something uncomfortable for a minute. And if you're not subscribed yet, do that too. 'Cause this is the kind of content that doesn't play it safe. We're talking about the stuff people feel but don't say. The power dynamics nobody wants to name. The moments that make you question everything you thought you understood about fairness, survival, and what it means to do the right thing when there is no right thing. You're not gonna find this vibe everywhere. And honestly, the only way I keep making it is if you show up. So if you're down to keep exploring these stories with me, the ones that sit in your chest a little longer than you expect, hit subscribe. You're not just watching. You're part of something here. Alright. Now let's get back into it. So here's where things start to get layered. You've got this environment, right? And it's not chaotic. It's not loud. Actually, it's the opposite. There's this eerie kind of order to it. Everyone knows their place. Everyone's playing their part. And at the center of it all, there's this presence. Not necessarily a person with a big title or a corner office, though sometimes it is. But more like an energy. Someone who doesn't have to raise their voice to make you feel small. Someone who can look at you and you just know, you don't matter here. Not in the way you thought you did. And the wild part? Most people in that space don't even notice it anymore. It's like living next to train tracks. At first, the noise drives you crazy. But after a while, you don't even hear it. You adapt. You normalize. You convince yourself this is just how it is. This is the cost of being here. So you keep your head down, you do what you're supposed to do, and you tell yourself it's fine. You're fine. Everything's fine. But there's always someone who doesn't adapt the same way. Not because they're braver. Not because they're smarter. But because for some reason, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's wiring, maybe it's just bad luck, they can't stop noticing. They see the patterns everyone else has learned to ignore. They feel the weight of the silence when someone walks into the room. They clock the micro-expressions, the shifts in tone, the way people rearrange themselves without being told. And once you start seeing that stuff, you can't unsee it. It's like a glitch in the matrix that only you're aware of. This person, the one we're talking about, they've been in this space long enough to know the rules. They know who gets to speak and who gets spoken over. They know who gets credit and who gets blamed. They've watched it happen 100 times. And they've learned very carefully how to stay out of the line of fire. They're not a threat. They're not competition. They're just there. A fixture. A part of the background. Useful when needed, forgettable the rest of the time. And that invisibility? It's both a curse and a kind of armor. Because when you're invisible, you see things. You hear things. People talk around you like you're not even in the room. They drop their guard. They let the mask slip. And over time, you start to piece together a picture that nobody else has. You start to understand how the machine actually works. Not the story everyone tells themselves. Not the version that sounds good in meetings or on social media. But the real mechanics. The backdoor deals. The quiet cruelties. The compromises people make and then pretend they didn't. Now, in this particular environment, there's a rhythm. A predictable flow. The person at the top sets the tone and everyone else falls in line. It's efficient. It's clean. It works. And because it works, nobody questions it. Why would they? Questioning the system when you're surviving inside it feels like sabotage. Like biting the hand that feeds you. So even when something feels off, even when your gut tells you this isn't right, you push it down. You rationalize. You move on. But here's the thing. Every system, no matter how tight, has a weak point. And usually that weak point isn't structural. It's human. It's the moment when someone makes a choice that doesn't align with the narrative. The moment when the carefully maintained order reveals itself to be more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. And our invisible person? They witness that moment. It's not dramatic. It's not a big speech or a public confrontation. It's small. Almost nothing. The kind of thing that, if you blinked, you'd miss. Maybe it's a gesture. Maybe it's a conversation that happens in a hallway when someone thinks they're alone. Maybe it's a document left open on a screen, or a tone of voice that doesn't match the words being said. But whatever it is, it's enough. Enough to confirm what they've been suspecting. Enough to make the invisible visible. And now they're stuck. Because knowing something and doing something are two entirely different games. Knowing is passive. Doing is a declaration. It's stepping out of the shadows and saying, I see you. I see what's happening here. And I'm not pretending anymore. And the second you do that, everything changes. You're no longer safe. You're no longer protected by your irrelevance. You become a problem. A liability. A target. So what do? Do you stay quiet? Do you protect yourself and let the thing you saw continue happening? Do you rationalize it the way everyone else does? Tell yourself it's not your responsibility, it's not your fight, it's not worth the risk? Or do you speak? Do you act? Knowing full well that the cost of doing so might be everything you've worked to build? Knowing that the system you're challenging has more power, more resources, more support than you ever will? This is the space we're in now. The space between knowing and doing. The space where morality gets real messy. Because it's easy to say what's right when you're not the one who has to pay the price. It's easy to judge from the outside. But when you're the one standing in that hallway holding that information, feeling the weight of what comes next, it's a whole different story. And the person at the top? They're not worried. Not yet. They don't even know there's a crack forming. They're still operating under the assumption that everything is under control. That everyone is playing along. That the order they've built is unshakable. And why wouldn't they think that? It's worked for this long. It's worked for everyone before. There's no reason to believe this time will be any different. But the invisible person? They're watching. They're calculating. They're sitting with a decision that hasn't been made yet, but is coming. And the tension in that, the anticipation of what might happen if they choose wrong or choose right or choose at all, that's where the real story lives. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because here's where it gets uncomfortable. The system we're talking about? It's not just one place. It's not just one dynamic. It's everywhere. It's in workplaces, in families, in friend groups, and institutions. Anywhere there's a power imbalance, anywhere there's someone who decides what's acceptable and someone else who has to live with that decision, this exact scenario is playing out. And most of the time, the invisible person stays invisible. Most of the time, the thing they see never gets said. Most of the time, the system wins. But not always. Sometimes something shifts. Sometimes the cost of staying silent becomes higher than the cost of speaking. Sometimes, the invisible person realizes that they've already lost what they were trying to protect. And when that happens, when someone who's been conditioned to disappear suddenly refuses to, that's when things get dangerous. Not because they're powerful, but because they're no longer afraid of being powerless. And the person at the top? They can feel it. They might not know exactly what it is yet, but they can sense the shift. The air changes. The dynamic wobbles. And for the first time in a long time, they're not sure they're in control. Alright, drop a comment if this is resonating. Just write, I see it. So let's talk about what happens when that shift actually starts to take form. Because this is where the psychology gets wild. The person at the top, the one who's been running the show, who's built this whole ecosystem around their presence and their rules, they start to feel it before they even understand it. It's subtle at first. Maybe it's a look that lasts half a second too long. Maybe it's a response that doesn't come as quickly as it used to. Maybe it's just a vibe, an intuition that something in the room has changed and they can't quite put their finger on it. And here's the thing about people who hold power, they're insanely attuned to threats. They have to be. That's how they got where they are. They've spent years, maybe decades, learning how to read a room, how to sense dissent before it becomes vocal, how to squash rebellion before it takes root. It's a survival skill. And when you've been at the top long enough, that skill becomes second nature. You don't even think about it anymore. You just know when something's off. But here's what's different this time. The threat isn't coming from where they expect it. It's not the ambitious second-in-command who's been gunning for their spot. It's not the loud dissenter who's always pushing back in meetings. It's not the obvious rival. It's the person they never even considered as a player in the game. The one who's been so far beneath their radar that they barely registered as human. And that's disorienting. Because how do you defend against something you didn't see coming? How do you neutralize a threat you never thought existed in the first place? The invisible person, meanwhile, is going through their own private hell. Because once you see the truth, once you hold that knowledge, it changes you. It's not just about the information itself. It's about what it represents. It's proof that everything you suspected, everything you felt in your gut but couldn't articulate, was real. The gaslighting you endured, the times you were told you were too sensitive or overthinking or making things up, it wasn't you. You were right. And now you have evidence. But that validation comes with a price. Because now you have to decide what to do with it. And both options feel impossible. If you stay silent, you're complicit. You're allowing the thing you know is wrong to continue happening. You become part of the machine you despise. You lose yourself in the compromise. But if you speak, if you step forward with what you know, you're gambling with everything. Your livelihood, your reputation, your safety. And there's no guarantee it'll even matter. There's no guarantee anyone will believe you. There's no guarantee the system will change. This is the moral quicksand we're talking about. There's no clean choice. There's no option that doesn't cost you something. It's loss versus loss. And the weight of that decision, the isolation of being the only person who knows what you know and having to figure out what to do with it, it's crushing. You can't talk to anyone about it without risking exposure. You can't process it out loud. You're stuck in your own head, running scenarios, imagining outcomes, trying to calculate which version of the future you can live with. And while all this is happening internally, externally, nothing has changed yet. The environment looks the same. The routines continue. The person at the top is still performing their role, still projecting confidence, still maintaining the order. But underneath, there's this current, this invisible tension. Like two tectonic plates pressing against each other, building pressure, waiting for the moment when something gives. Now, let me go even deeper into this because what we're really talking about here is the anatomy of courage. And I don't mean the Hollywood version of courage, the big dramatic moment, the hero's speech, the triumphant music. I'm talking about the real thing. The kind of courage that's quiet and unglamorous and frankly kind of ugly. The kind that doesn't feel brave when you're doing it. Feels terrifying. It feels like you're making the worst decision of your life. It feels like you're about to destroy everything for a principle that might not even matter to anyone but you. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite knowing exactly how bad it could go. It's choosing the harder path when the easier one is right there, glowing and available and infinitely more comfortable. And the invisible person? They're sitting in that exact space right now. They know what the easy path looks like. Keep your head down. Pretend you didn't see what you saw. Let someone else deal with it. Protect yourself. Survive. That's the logical choice. That's the smart choice. That's what most people would do and no one would blame them for it. But there's something else happening too. Something that's harder to quantify but just as real. It's this gnawing sense that if you don't act, you'll lose something you can't get back. Not your job, not your status, but something deeper. Your sense of self. Your ability to look in the mirror and recognize who you are. Because once you know something, once you see the truth, you can't unknow it. And every day you stay silent is another day you're choosing to live with that dissonance. Another day you're betraying the part of yourself that believed in something more than survival. And that internal war? That's the real story. That's what keeps you up at night. That's what makes your hands shake when you think about what comes next. Because you're not just deciding whether to speak. You're deciding who you're going to be. And both versions of yourself, the one who stays silent and the one who speaks, they both exist as possibilities right now. And only one of them gets to be real. Meanwhile, the person at the top is starting to get paranoid. Not in an obvious way. They're not panicking. They're not showing weakness. But they're paying attention now. They're watching. They're trying to figure out where the shift is coming from. And the more they look, the more they realize they can't see it. It's like trying to catch smoke. You know it's there, you can smell it, but you can't grab it. And that uncertainty, that loss of control, it's maddening. Because control is the foundation of their power. Without it, they're just another person in the room. So they start to tighten their grip. Maybe they call more meetings. Maybe they demand more reports. Maybe they make an example of someone else, just to remind everyone what happens when you step out of line. It's a classic move. When you feel your power slipping, you assert it harder. You remind people who's in charge. You make the consequences of defiance so visible, so painful, that no one dares to even think about challenging you. But here's the paradox. The more they do that, the more they reveal their fear. Because confident power doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. But insecure power? Threatened power? It broadcasts its anxiety in every move. And the invisible person sees it. They see the mask starting to crack. They see the vulnerability underneath all that performance. And in a weird way, that makes the decision even harder. Because now it's not just about challenging a system. It's about looking another human being in the eye. Someone who's scared, someone who's flawed, someone who's just trying to protect what they've built, and saying, "This ends now." That's not heroic. That's human. And it's messy as hell. The invisible person is also realizing something else. They're not going to have backup. Nobody's going to step forward with them. The other people in the environment, the ones who've also seen glimpses of the truth, who've also felt the discomfort, who've also wondered if things could be different, they're not moving. They're staying exactly where they are. Because from their perspective, the risk is too high and the benefit is too uncertain. Why would you blow up your life for a principle when there's no guarantee it'll change anything? Why would you trust that the invisible person's revelation will actually matter? And that's the loneliest part of this whole thing. The moment when you realize you're the only one willing to pay the price. The moment when you understand that solidarity is a nice idea, but in practice, most people will choose self-preservation every single time. And you can't even be mad at them for it. Because up until now, that's exactly what you were doing too. So the decision crystallizes. It's not about whether to act anymore. It's about when, and how, and what words to use. Because if you're going to do this, if you're going to step out of the shadows and say what needs to be said, it has to be done right. It has to be clear. It has to be undeniable. Because you only get one shot. If you fumble it, if you let emotion override precision, if you give them any opening to dismiss you or discredit you, then it's over. You'll have sacrificed everything for nothing. And the person at the top? They still don't know it's coming. They're still operating under the assumption that they've regained control. That whatever wobble they felt has been corrected. That the order has been restored. But deep down, in a place they won't admit even to themselves, they know something's different. They know the room doesn't feel the same. They know there's a presence they can't quite locate, a voice they haven't heard yet but can somehow sense waiting in the wings. The stage is set. The moment is coming. And neither of them is ready for what happens next. Alright, I need you to do something. Drop a comment and just write, "I've been there." Because I know some of you have felt this exact thing. Maybe not in this exact scenario, but in some version of it. And I want you to know you're not alone in that. Now here's where everything starts to fracture. Not all at once. Not in some explosive, cinematic way. But like ice cracking under pressure. Slow, inevitable, and impossible to stop once it starts. The invisible person makes a move. Not the big one. Not yet. But a small one. A calculated one. Maybe it's a question asked in a meeting that lands differently than it should. Maybe it's a document placed where it needs to be seen. Maybe it's a conversation initiated with someone who has just enough influence to amplify what comes next. Whatever it is, it's precise, it's intentional, and it's designed to do one thing: force a reaction. And the person at the top? They react. Of course they do. Because that's what power does when it feels threatened. It responds. It asserts. It reminds everyone in the room who's really in control here. But here's the thing, the response itself is the tell. Because if there was truly nothing to hide, if the system was truly as solid as they've been performing it to be, they wouldn't need to react at all. The fact that they do, the fact that they feel compelled to address it, to shut it down, to redirect the narrative, that's the crack showing. And everyone in the room feels it. Not everyone understands it yet. Not everyone can articulate what just shifted. But there's this moment of collective discomfort. Like when you're watching a movie and you know the next scene is going to hurt, but you can't look away. The air gets thicker. People who were casually checking their phones suddenly look up. The room, which moments ago felt routine and predictable, now feels dangerous. Because something real just happened. Something that wasn't scripted. Something that can't be undone. The invisible person sees the reaction and knows they were right. The truth they've been sitting on, the thing they saw and couldn't unsee, it's not just true. It's vulnerable. It's the kind of truth that threatens the entire foundation. And the person at the top knows it too. They might not know exactly what the invisible person has, but they know enough to be worried. And worry in someone who's used to absolute control looks a lot like anger. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. The person at the top can't go full nuclear. Not yet. Because they don't know how much the invisible person knows. They don't know who else might know. They don't know what evidence exists or where it might surface. So they have to tread carefully. They have to appear calm, collected, unbothered, even while they're internally scrambling to figure out how to contain this. It's a performance within a performance. And it's exhausting. Meanwhile, the invisible person is dealing with their own internal chaos. Because taking that first step, making that first move, it changes everything. There's no going back now. The safety of invisibility is gone. They've been seen. They've been marked. And even if nothing else happens, even if the whole thing fizzles out, they're no longer under the radar. They're a known quantity now. A risk. And risks get managed. So the stakes have officially escalated. What was once a private moral dilemma is now a public dynamic. And everyone in the environment is starting to choose sides, even if they don't realize they're doing it. Some people instinctively align with power, because that's what's kept them safe so far. They double down on loyalty, on trust, on the belief that the person at the top knows what they're doing and wouldn't steer them wrong. Other people start to quietly distance themselves. Not in an obvious way. But they stop engaging as much. They stop volunteering information. They start hedging their bets just in case. And then there are the ones who are genuinely confused. The ones who don't know what to believe. Who see both sides and can't figure out which version of reality is accurate. And honestly, those are the most dangerous people in the room. Because they're the swing votes. They're the ones who could tip the balance either way depending on what happens next. Now, let me take you deeper into what's happening in the mind of the person at the top. Because this is where the humanity of it all comes into focus. They're not a cartoon villain. They're not evil for the sake of being evil. They're someone who built something. Someone who worked hard, made sacrifices, fought their way to this position. And from their perspective, they're not the bad guy in this story. They're the one holding everything together. They're the one making the hard decisions nobody else wants to make. They're the one carrying the weight of responsibility while everyone else gets to stay comfortable and criticize from the sidelines. And now, after all of that, after everything they've given and sacrificed and endured, someone who they never even considered a threat is questioning them, challenging them, undermining them. And it feels like betrayal. Feels like ingratitude. Feels like the whole world has gone crazy and they're the only sane person left. So yeah, they're angry. But underneath the anger, there's fear. Real, raw human fear. Because if they lose control of this narrative, if the truth comes out in a way they can't spin or manage, then everything they built could collapse. Their legacy, their identity, their sense of self, it's all tied to this position, this role, this version of the story where they're the hero. And that's the tragedy of it. Because they genuinely can't see it from any other angle. They've been at the top for so long that they've lost the ability to imagine what it looks like from the bottom. They've forgotten what it feels like to be powerless, to be unheard, to be dismissed. Or maybe they never knew in the first place. Either way, the empathy gap is massive. And it's that gap, that inability to truly see the invisible person as a full human with valid concerns and real pain, that's driving this whole conflict. The invisible person, on the other hand, is starting to feel the weight of what they've set in motion. Because once you challenge power, power doesn't just sit there and take it. Power fights back. and it fights dirty. Suddenly, small things start happening. Mistakes get noticed that used to slide by. Contributions get overlooked. Conversations stop when they enter the room. It's subtle. It's deniable. But it's real. And the message is clear. Fall in line or face the consequences. But here's the thing. At this point, falling in line isn't really an option anymore. The invisible person has already crossed the line. They've already shown their cards. And backing down now wouldn't make them safe again. It would just make them weak. It would prove to everyone watching that power always wins, that speaking up is pointless, that the system can't be changed. And that outcome might actually be worse than whatever comes next. So they double down. Not out of bravery necessarily, but out of a lack of other options. Because what else is there? They've already lost the safety of invisibility. They might as well go all the way. Might as well make it count. Might as well say what needs to be said even if it costs them everything, because at least then they'll know they tried. At least then they won't spend the rest of their life wondering what would have happened if they'd just been a little braver, a little louder, a little more willing to risk it all for the truth. And this is where the external pressure starts to mount. Because it's not just the person at the top who's invested in maintaining the status quo. It's the entire ecosystem. The people who benefit from the current structure, even in small ways. The people who've made peace with the compromises. The people who just want things to stay calm and predictable because change is scary and uncomfortable and threatens their sense of stability. All of those people, consciously or not, become enforcers of the system. They push back against the invisible person, not because they necessarily disagree, but because rocking the boat makes their own lives harder. So now the invisible person isn't just up against one person. They're up against a culture. A collective agreement to look the other way, to keep things running smoothly, to prioritize comfort over correctness. And that's a much bigger fight than they ever anticipated. That's the kind of fight you can't win by being right. You can only win by being relentless. By refusing to let the pressure break you. By continuing to stand even when every rational part of your brain is screaming at you to sit down and shut up. And the person at the top? They're starting to crack. Not publicly. Not in any way that most people would notice. But if you're paying attention, if you're really watching, you can see it. The smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. The joke that falls flat. The response that's a little too sharp, a little too defensive. The cracks are forming. The mask is slipping. And deep down they know it. They can feel their grip loosening. They can sense that the narrative is slipping out of their control. And that terrifies them more than anything else. Because here's the ultimate truth about power: it's not actually real. It's a shared illusion. It only works as long as everyone agrees to play along. The second people stop believing in it, the second they stop respecting it, it evaporates. And the person at the top can feel that evaporation beginning. They can feel the room starting to doubt. Starting to question. Starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the invisible person has a point. And that doubt, that tiny seed of uncertainty, that's the beginning of the end. Not the end of the story, but the end of the old order. The end of the way things were. Because once doubt enters the room, it spreads. It's contagious. And no amount of control or intimidation can stop it once it takes root. The invisible person knows this too. They can feel the shift happening. They can sense that the moment is coming. The moment when everything they've been building toward, all the fear, all the doubt, all the courage they've been scraping together, is about to be tested in the most real way possible. And there's no script for what comes next. There's no roadmap. There's just the decision to keep going or to stop. To speak or to stay silent. To be seen or to disappear. And the room is waiting. Everyone is waiting. Even the people who don't fully understand what's happening can feel that something is about to break. Something is about to give. And whatever comes next is going to change everything. Comment below, the shift is real. So here's what happens. The moment finally arrives. Not with fanfare. Not with a crowd gathering or cameras rolling. It happens in the most ordinary setting imaginable. Maybe it's a routine meeting. Maybe it's a hallway conversation. Maybe it's an email thread that suddenly goes from mundane to nuclear. But the invisible person, the one who's been carrying this weight, who's been calculating and preparing and second-guessing every single move, they finally say it. They put the truth out there. And it's not dramatic. It's not a speech. It's just a few sentences. Calm, clear, undeniable. And the person at the top hears it. Really hears it. Not the noise around it, not the implications or the politics or the threat. Just the actual words. The actual truth. And for a split second, just a flash, their face does something it hasn't done in years. It softens. The mask drops. The performance stops. And what's underneath is just a person. A tired, confused, human person who suddenly realizes they've been so focused on maintaining control that they stopped seeing what was actually happening. They stopped listening. They stopped caring about anything other than the structure they built and the image they projected. But here's the thing, that moment of recognition doesn't lead where you think it does. Because this isn't a redemption arc. This isn't a movie where the person in power has a sudden change of heart and everything gets fixed with an apology and a hug. Real life doesn't work like that. Power doesn't surrender just because it's been confronted with truth. If anything, truth makes power more defensive, more dangerous. Because now it's not just about maintaining control, it's about protecting ego. About not admitting that all this time they were wrong. That all this time they were causing harm. That all this time, the invisible person they dismissed and overlooked actually saw them more clearly than they saw themselves. So what the person at the top does next is heartbreaking in its predictability. They shut down. Not completely. Not in a way that's obvious to everyone watching. But emotionally they close the door. They rebuild the walls. They retreat back into the role, back into the performance, back into the version of themselves that doesn't have to feel this. And they do what people in power always do when they're backed into a corner. They reframe the narrative. They make it about process, about timing, about how things were said rather than what was said. They find a way to be the victim. To be the one who's been attacked, misunderstood, treated unfairly. And you know what? Some people buy it. Because people want to believe in the structures they've invested in. They want to believe that the person at the top deserves to be there. That the system works. That if they just keep their heads down and play by the rules, they'll be okay. So they accept the reframing. They nod along. They tell themselves that maybe the invisible person went too far, said it the wrong way, should have been more diplomatic. They find reasons to side with power, because siding with power feels safer than siding with truth. But not everyone. And that's the thing that breaks the person at the top more than the confrontation itself. It's the realization that the unanimous support they thought they had, the loyalty they took for granted, it was always conditional. It was always performance. And now that the mask has been ripped off, now that the truth is out there hanging in the air, some people are choosing differently. Not loudly. Not publicly. But quietly, internally, they're recalibrating. They're seeing the person at the top differently. And once you've lost that, once people stop seeing you the way you need them to, you can never fully get it back. The invisible person, meanwhile, is dealing with the aftermath. And it's not triumphant. It's not relief. It's complicated. Because they did the thing. They spoke up. They told the truth. And the world didn't end. The system didn't collapse. The person at the top is still there, still in power, still performing the same role. On the surface, nothing changed. And that realization, that you can do everything right, you can be brave and honest and clear, and the outcome can still be frustratingly incomplete, that's brutal. That's the part they don't tell you about standing up to power. You do it expecting some kind of resolution, some kind of closure. But what you get instead is just more complexity, more ambiguity, more proof that there are no clean endings in real life. But here's what did change, even if it's not obvious yet. The invisible person is no longer invisible. And I don't just mean in the room. I mean to themselves. They know now what they're capable of. They know they can carry the weight of truth even when it's crushing. They know they can stand alone even when it's terrifying. They know they can look power in the eye and not flinch. And that knowledge, that shift in identity, it's permanent. It's the kind of transformation that you can't undo. You can't go back to being the person who stays silent. You can't unknow your own capacity for courage. And other people saw it too. The ones who were watching closely. The ones who've been in that same position, sitting on their own truths, wondering if it's worth the risk. They saw someone step forward. They saw someone survive it. And even though the outcome wasn't perfect, even though the system didn't immediately change, something in them shifted too. Because now they know it's possible. Now they've seen proof that you can speak and still exist afterward. And that's how real change actually happens. Not through one grand gesture, but through small acts of courage that give other people permission to be brave too. Now, let me take this even deeper because there's something we haven't talked about yet. The person at the top, they're not okay. Not even close. On the outside, they're still performing. Still showing up. Still running the meetings and making the decisions and pretending everything's fine. But inside, they're haunted. Because that moment when the mask dropped, that split second when they actually saw themselves through someone else's eyes, they can't unsee it. It planted a seed of doubt that won't stop growing. And every time they perform the role now, every time they assert their authority or dismiss someone's concern or make a decision from the top down, there's this tiny voice in the back of their head asking, am I the villain in someone else's story? And that question That's the real break. Because once you start asking it, you can't stop. You start replaying interactions. You start questioning your own motives. You start wondering if all the things you told yourself were necessary were actually just excuses. And the scary part is there's no good answer. Because the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You're not entirely wrong. But you're not entirely right either. You caused harm even though you didn't mean to. You perpetuated a system even while believing you were just doing your job. And sitting with that complexity, with the fact that you can be both hurt and harmful, both right and wrong, that's the most uncomfortable place a human can be. So what does the person at the top do with that discomfort? Some people lean into it. They let it change them. They start making different choices, asking different questions, building different systems. They use the pain as a catalyst for growth. But others, and this is more common, they bury it. They double down. They convince themselves that the problem wasn't them, it was everyone else. They build thicker walls. They get harder. They become the very thing they were accused of being, not because they were always that person but because the alternative, admitting fault and changing, feels like too much to bear. And the tragedy is you can't force that choice on someone. You can speak truth. You can hold up a mirror. You can create the conditions for transformation. But you can't make someone choose growth over self-protection. That's their journey. That's their work. And sometimes, no matter how clearly you see their potential, no matter how much you want them to choose differently, they just don't. The invisible person has to make peace with that. They have to accept that they don't control the outcome. They only control their own actions, their own integrity, their own willingness to keep showing up as the fullest version of themselves even when it would be easier to shrink back down. And that acceptance, that surrender of control over how other people respond to truth, it's weirdly liberating. Because once you let go of needing the story to end a certain way, you can just focus on playing your part with as much honesty and courage as you can muster. And that's enough. It has to be enough. The room, meanwhile, is still processing. Still trying to figure out what just happened and what it means for them. And here's what's wild. Different people take completely different lessons from the exact same event. Some people see the invisible person's courage and feel inspired. Some people see the person at the top's defensiveness and feel vindicated in their own cynicism. Some people see the whole messy situation and just want to avoid conflict even more than they did before. There's no unified narrative. There's no collective awakening. Just a bunch of individuals trying to make sense of a moment that destabilized their sense of how things work. And maybe that's the most honest version of what change looks like. Not everyone transformed. Not everyone enlightened. Just a crack in the foundation. A shift in the atmosphere. A new possibility introduced into a space that previously felt fixed. And over time, slowly, imperceptibly, that crack widens. That shift becomes normal. That possibility becomes real. Not because of one dramatic moment, but because someone was willing to start the fracture and other people, gradually, were willing to step into the opening. So the story doesn't end cleanly. The invisible person doesn't ride off into the sunset. The person at the top doesn't have a redemption arc. The system doesn't collapse and rebuild overnight. What happens instead is more subtle and more profound. Everyone involved, the ones who spoke, the ones who listened, the ones who turned away, they're all different now. Changed in ways they might not even recognize yet. Carrying new questions. Holding new possibilities. Living in a world that's just slightly more honest than it was before. And honestly, that might be the best outcome we can hope for. Not perfection. Not justice in some absolute sense. But movement. Growth. The slow, painful, necessary work of becoming more human together. Drop a comment if this landed different than you expected. Just right, it's the fracture. Look, if you made it all the way to this point, I just want to say, thank you. For real. Because this isn't the kind of content you half-watch while scrolling through your phone. This is the kind of thing that asks you to sit with discomfort, to think about your own moments of invisibility or power, to question the systems you're part of. And the fact that you stayed? That says something about who you are. If this resonated with you, if any part of the story made you feel seen or challenged or just different, hit that like button. Not for the algorithm, but because it tells me you want more of this. More stories that don't wrap up clean. More conversations that go to the uncomfortable places. More honesty about what it actually costs to speak up, to change, to become. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Because this is what we do here. We don't chase trends. We don't do surface-level takes. We go deep into the human stuff. The power dynamics, the moral dilemmas, the moments that change us in ways we don't always understand right away. If that's the kind of space you want to be in, subscribe. Join the people who are willing to sit with complexity instead of demanding easy answers. Before you go, drop a comment. Just write, "I stayed," because I want to know who's really here. Who's willing to engage with this kind of content? Who's part of this community we're building together? And listen, there's another video right here that picks up on some of these threads. Different story, same kind of depth. Click on that and keep going with me. Let's keep this conversation moving. I'll see you there.